accessible. Careful. There you go. Careful. Careful. Hold the seat chair down. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. All jurors and alternates are present in People versus Robert Durst. The defendant is present with Mr. Chestnut and Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Miana and Mr. Bailey, and at council table assisted by Mr. Milius and Mr. Lewin. Now, did we have exhibits from this last reading?
Yes, Your Honor. At the conclusion of Zena Simmons' Galveston testimony, Your Honor, we have a exhibit stipulation form which we'd like marked as People's 190 for identification. As I indicated, we were taking the witness out of order, so we previously marked 191. But this will be 190. And we have a one-page calendar which was identified as State's Exhibit 502 in the testimony, and that will be People's 190A. And there was a photograph of Morris Black, which the party stipulated to was Defense 19. That was previously marked for identification as People's 188A.
Very well. And now, I understand you'll be reading the transcript of the testimony of Robert Durst from that trial.
Yes. Before we do that, may we do two quick stipulations?
Yes, you may.
Actually, three.
All right. The 3 is the limit.
So I have a stipulation. It's stipulation 19 originally. May I mark this as People's 192?
Yes.
I have a DVD with a video. May I mark this as People's 193?
Yes.
I have a copy of the front and back of a money order. May I mark this as People's 194?
Yes.
I have a copy of a money order, front and back. May I mark this as People's 195?
Yes.
All right. Counsel, we stipulate as following. The video marked for identification as People's Exhibit 193 is a true and correct copy of a security video depicting defendant Robert Durst purchasing a money order marked for identification as People's Exhibit 194. This will be known as the Walmart money order. It was purchased inside Walmart, 6701 Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, Texas on September 28, 2001. The Walmart video contains time and date stamps which are accurate. The document marked for identification as People's Exhibit 195, this will be known as the Arlen's money order, is a true and correct copy of a money order, serial number 981-482-7040, purchased by defendant Robert Durst on September 12, 2001 at Arlen's Market, located at 2415 Avenue P, Galveston, Texas. Defendant Robert Durst made the money order in the amount of $500 payable to Klaus Dillman. Defendant Robert Durst purchased the money order using the name Dorothy Seiner. The Walmart money order is a true and correct copy of a money order, serial number 981-939-1754. This Walmart money order was purchased by defendant Robert Durst on September 28, 2001, between the times of 4:30 and 4:36 p.m. at First Convenience Bank, located within Walmart at 6702 Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, Texas. Defendant Robert Durst made the money order in the amount of $300 payable to Klaus Dillman. Defendant Robert Durst purchased this money order using the name Morris Black. 2213 Avenue K, Unit 1. So stipulated?
Stipulated.
I believe, I don't know if it was stated, but that was stipulation 19.
Yes. Your Honor, I have another stipulation. It's original stipulation 33. May I mark this stipulation as People's 196?
Yes.
Counsel, would you stipulate as follows?
When the stipulation number was
33.
33.
Yes, it's now People's 196.
Got it.
On September 28, 2001, at 11 p.m. Houston time, Defendant Robert Durst purchased a ticket for a round-trip flight from Houston, Texas to New York City LaGuardia Airport for travel on October 1st, 2001. Defendant made the purchase over the telephone. On September 29th, 2001, at 3:38 a.m. Houston time, defendant called the airlines and changed the ticket from round trip to one-way for travel on October 1st, 2001. He also changed the class of the ticket from first class to coach class. During the same telephone conversation, he changed the ticket back again to first class. Defendant ultimately did not use the ticket. On October 1st, 2001, he requested and was given a refund. So stipulated?
So stipulated.
And, Your Honor, I have a third stipulation. May I
Yes.
mark it as People's 197?
Yeah.
This is original stipulation 46. I have a document commonly known as the BD story. May I mark this as People's 198? It's a
Yes.
33-page document.
Yes.
Counsel, you stipulate as follows. Colin Wilm, W-I-L-H-M, was employed as an assistant to Andrew Drecke from 2008 until July of 2014. At the request of Andrew Drecke, during the production of the Jinx, Mr. Wilm visited Emily Altman and picked up a box of documents from Ms. Altman, which defendant Robert Durst had instructed Ms. Altman to provide to Mr. Drecke. The document marked for identification as People's Exhibit 198, commonly referred to as the BD story, was contained within this box. So stipulated?
Stipulated.
Thank you, Your Honor. That would conclude the stipulations we have for now.
As far as this security video, is that played within testimony? Is that does that to be displayed at all?
You know, we can display it in the future, not at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then next we have the testimony of Defendant Robert Durst that's going to be presented. This is a testimony given during the Galveston trial, which took place over several days starting on October 22nd of 2003. The role of the prosecutor, I believe it was Mr. Ramsey, is going to be played by Anusha Mathur.
Ramsey was one of the
I'm sorry, not Ramsey, I'm
defense
sorry.
lawyers.
You're right, I'm sorry, not Mr. Ramsey, Mr. Sistrom. And the role of Robert Durst is going to be played by our law student, John Irwin. Is Mr. DeGuerin playing the part of Mr. DeGuerin?
I am.
Yes. And we'll have Miss Anusha Mathur also playing the role of the judge, or reading any parts of the judge, if any.
And, Your Honor, this is, so the jury can be reminded, this is what happened 20 years ago almost in Galveston. It's not necessarily what would be the testimony today. It's what happened in Galveston.
That's not an appropriate.
Yeah, I
Well, I
mean,
think
so
it's
the
appropriate.
evidence is the
certainly is.
evidence. You can't speculate as to what, that there would be different answers or what today. So that's just, I agree,
Yeah.
Mr. DeGuerin. I agree with the first part. This is testimony from 20 years ago. The rest of it is not the jury's concern.
I think it was stated, but this is the testimony of Bob Durst, the defendant.
Yes, Robert Durst.
Yes, and I will be reading my part, but Mr. Ramsey, who was my co-counsel, along with Chip Lewis, also questioned Mr. Durst. So there were two of us that questioned him. And there were two prosecutors that questioned Mr. Durst, Mr. Sistrunk and Mr. Bennett.
I see. So those identities will merge within the reading by the reader.
I think we'll see that the style is a little different with each.
But that's for the, all right, perhaps we'll notice that. We'll
Let's
look
hope all
for
of
that.
us be paid
Thank you.
close
And
attention.
Your Honor, I have the 485-page transcript. If I can have that marked as Court's Exhibit 12, I think it is, or?
Yes, we're at 12 now.
This is the longest transcript we will have. It's downhill from here.
It's 13, Your Honor.
It's 13.
Oh, 13, I'm
I
sorry.
stand corrected. It is court's 13.
13. Okay, thank you.
When it's a court's exhibit, that means I keep it, but it won't go into the jury room as an exhibit. If for some reason you needed, needed to hear it, it could be read to you.
Is it okay if I have the
Yes, he may
reader
come
approach?
come
Thank you.
forward. Yes.
And also, Your Honor, there will be some demonstrations that took place during the testimony involving the pistol that's been introduced here. How does the court want us to handle that?
I do not believe that the
Okay, Mr. Lewin, what is the people's suggestion?
well, I don't, my memory is that we don't have, those demonstrations are a minimal part, if any, of the testimony that we admitted that we're bringing in. Again, this is being offered pursuant to Evidence Code Section 1200 as an admission by the defendant. So we're not reading all of his testimony in, we're reading the parts that we're bringing in.
Very well. If you have some suggestion for,
I think we need a sidebar.
all right, let's make sure we have our ground rules. So we will take a brief sidebar. You can stand and stretch. This shouldn't take too long. We'll do this, I think we can do this off the record at first. Rules down. And we can now present this testimony of Robert Durst, October 22, 2003, in front of the Honorable Susan Chris, District Court, Galveston County, Texas.
Supposed to say and action?
You may begin.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, you
You
can.
want me to start it? Robert Durst was called as a witness to testify on his own behalf, and after having first been duly sworn, assumed the witness stand, and upon examination testified as follows. Question by me. Not that it's necessary after a month and a half, but for the record, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury your name.
Robert Durst.
There's a microphone in front of you, a little flat thing. If you will pull that close to you so you can be heard. Mr. Durst, when were you born?
April 12th, 1943.
And where were you born?
New York City.
Okay, just pause a second. So I am going to ask you to cover your nose.
Yes, sir.
There you go. Okay, and speak directly into that microphone so you can be heard. You're being heard pretty well now, but keep that up. Keep
The
going.
court, would you keep your voice up, please, sir?
New York, New York City?
Yes.
Who was your father?
Seymour Durst.
And your mother?
Marie Durst.
Is your father still alive?
No, sir.
Is your mother still alive?
No, sir.
How old were you when your mother died?
7.
Were you present when she died?
Yes, sir.
And how did she die?
She died a violent death.
I'm gonna have you actually, once again, try to pull it up maybe a little farther and it won't slip down so easily. Go ahead.
Explain for us how she died.
She fell or jumped off the roof of our house.
After that happened, were you raised by your father or not?
No, sir.
Who raised you?
Governesses.
Do you have brothers and a sister?
I have 2 younger brothers and a younger sister.
How much difference in age is there between you and your siblings?
Several years between my brother, younger than I guess 4 years between my sister and 7 between my younger brother.
Were you raised with your brothers and sister?
No, sir.
You were raised separately?
Yes, sir.
And let's talk a little bit about your schooling. Where did you go to school?
I went to school in the Scarsdale public school system.
Scarsdale is a suburb of New York City
Yes, sir.
in Westchester County.
Yes, sir.
Did you go to public schools or private schools?
Public school.
Where did you go to high school?
Scarsdale High School.
Did you know in your school years a lady by the name of, then a girl of course, by the name of Dorothy Siner?
Yes, sir.
When did you first become acquainted with Dorothy Siner?
3rd or 4th grade, like that.
Did you go to the same schools when you were in the 3rd or 4th grade?
Different elementary schools, but we went to the same Sunday school, Temple.
And where did you go to Sunday school or temple?
What was the name of it? Temple Emmanuel.
In Scarsdale?
Yes, sir.
In high school, what were your activities in high school?
I didn't do much in the way of high school. I went and left at the end of the day.
Did you ever date Dorothy Siner?
Well, her testimony, she remembers it like that. I remember going to some parties with her. That's all.
Tell us, did you have a large circle of friends or not?
No, sir.
Where did you go to college?
Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania is the same place where you were arrested on November the 30th of 2001. Is that right?
That's correct.
When you went to Lehigh, what did you study?
Economics.
And were you in a fraternity?
Yes, sir.
What was the fraternity?
Pi Lambda Phi.
Was Lehigh at that time a co-ed school?
No, it was all men.
And tell us about your circle of friends in college.
Very small, change every year, sort of.
Did you graduate from Lehigh?
Yes, sir.
And how were your grades?
Mediocre.
When you graduated, what kind of degree did you have?
A Bachelor of Science in Economics.
From Lehigh, where did you go? Did you continue your schooling someplace?
Yes, at UCLA.
In Southern California?
Yes, sir.
What did you study at UCLA?
Economics.
How long were you at UCLA?
1965 to 1970.
So 5 years?
Yes, sir.
Did you get a graduate degree?
No, sir.
Have you from time to time claimed otherwise?
Yes, sir.
Why?
I guess it just made me feel better.
Tell the jury a little bit about what you did during your 5 years at UCLA.
Sort of discovered the hippie lifestyle It wasn't necessary for the university very much in order to stay enrolled in a PhD program. It was the late 60s and very liberal. Lots of demonstrations, and lots of the time the university was on strike. The professors were more or less on the same side as the students against the administration. Nobody really got bad grades in anything.
Did you meet Susan Berman at UCLA?
Yes, my very first summer there, I met Susan.
Did you become friendly or good friends with Susan Berman?
We became best friends right away.
Were you friends or were you girlfriend, boyfriend?
No, we were never girlfriend, boyfriend.
Well, explain your relationship with Susan Berman.
Well, we met at the pool at her dormitory in Dykstra, and we would just talk for days on end. Her upbringing was similar to mine. Wealthy family that owned hotels in Las Vegas. She had difficulty with her family. It was alluded to be the fact that her father was in various mobs that owned Las Vegas hotels. My family was a wealthy family from New York City that owned real estate also. She didn't get along with her parents very well, and neither did I with my father. That was about it. We stayed, in essence, lifelong friends.
Did you share something else in common with regard to your mother?
Both of our mothers had died when we were young. I think hers died when she was 9.
While you were at UCLA, did you also meet Diane Nguyen?
Yes, Diane became my first girlfriend.
You say first girlfriend. How old were you when you were at UCLA?
I got there when I was 22.
After you left UCLA, did you see Diane Nguyen anymore?
Yeah, we stayed friends until 1973, after I got married, until I got married.
Okay, and while you were at UCLA, did you discover marijuana?
Yes, it became a lifelong addiction or friend or whatever.
From the time you were at UCLA until your arrest November the 30th of 2001, what was your marijuana usage?
Essentially daily.
When you left UCLA, where did you go?
I went back to New York the summer of 1970.
And what did you do when you got back to New York?
My father had a house about an hour and a half north of New York he wasn't using. And I basically lived there, and I met Kathleen McCormack.
You and Kathy, after you met, what did you do? Did you begin dating her?
I began dating her, and we started living together almost immediately.
Did you go directly into the Durst organization, the family business, then, or not?
No. Kathy and I moved up to Vermont and lived sort of a back to the land lifestyle, and opened a health food store, heated with wood, and did those things.
In Vermont, did your father approve of you moving to Vermont?
No.
Did your father approve of you living with Kathleen McCormack?
He didn't have much of a problem with that, but he wanted me to live in New York and go into the family business.
Did you want to go into the family business?
No.
Explain to the jury, please, what the family business consisted of then. And I'll ask you then, after that, what it is now, but what was the family business in the 70s?
Well, my family has been in New York since not long after the Civil War, really. And we had landed in Midtown, Times Square area, which is once upon a time a farm. And as the area developed, we kept owning the land, and we would build whatever was the appropriate kind of building on it. Initially houses, and then apartment buildings, and eventually office buildings. It was the same then as now, except then there was a whole lot more land, and now there is a whole lot more office buildings.
So even in the 70s, was the Durst family business, the Durst organization, a powerful business entity in New York?
We were always one of the top 5 or 6 owners of property in Manhattan.
Were you interested in that business?
No.
Tell us a little bit about your life in Vermont with Kathy.
We were very happy, as I remember.
And what did you do?
As I said, we bought a small piece of property, we improved a cabin that was on it, and we ran this health food store and lived there.
Now, the health food store, did it make a living for you?
No.
Did you need income from the health food store in order for you and Kathy to live?
No. I always had more money than I could possibly spend.
Explain that to us just briefly. First, what was your ownership or the form of ownership that you had in the Durst organization or the Durst family business?
Well, the Durst family properties are owned by trusts, which were set up in the late 30s or early 40s. And each individual's interest gets passed on to them and their wife, their children, like that. So each year, the income is distributed. And it was always far more income than I could spend. And when I turned 21, there was a large bank account of accumulated money since I was born.
So for several years, tell us how long you and Kathy lived in Vermont.
1970 in the fall until 1973 in the spring.
At some point, you and Kathy married. When did you get married?
If I could get some water?
Yes, I'll get it for you. You and Kathy married when?
We were married on my birthday, April 12th, 1973, when I turned 30.
And where did you marry?
In Westchester County, near where my father's house was.
Have you had several dogs named Igor?
Well, that was the first, yes.
And was your wedding a large wedding or not?
It was my father and Kathy's mother. Kathy's father had died when she was young.
You got married in Scarsdale. What happened to the business that you and Kathy had in Vermont, the health food store?
Excuse me, it wasn't in Scarsdale. It was near where my father's house was in northern Westchester.
Westchester, I'm sorry.
We sort of sold it.
Why did you sell it?
The family wanted me to move back to New York. I went along with my father's wishes and agreed to go into the family business.
Did you want to go back to New York?
No.
Why did you do that?
Why did I do that? It seemed like what I should do. My father was telling me how I was being spiteful. He worked all his life, and he lived there, and I was ignoring it.
By that time, who were the principals of the Durst organization?
My father and his 2 brothers.
So did you move to New York?
Yes, sir.
And did you become involved in the Durst organization?
Well, I became involved, but not wholeheartedly.
What did you do for the Durst organization?
Some leasing and a lot of the bookkeeping type things.
Was it work that you were interested in?
No.
And how did you feel about your position with the Durst organization?
New York City commercial real estate business is very buttoned down and white shoe, and everyone dresses and acts appropriately. And I just wasn't really set up for all that.
What do you mean you weren't set up for it? You were wearing a button-down shirt now.
And I'm wearing chinos now. It was a matter of you had to have... Everyone looked like they had just gone to Brooks Brothers and purchased the same clothing, and you spoke properly, and you didn't kid around, and you didn't slouch, and you were all interested in doing that. Most people had MBAs or law degrees. Everyone took it very, very seriously. And I could just never get into dressing properly and taking the whole thing very seriously.
I want to direct your attention to 1982. Something happened in 1982 that kind of turned your world upside down.
Yes. Kathy and I had moved to New York from a suburban location in Westchester County in 1978. To my great shock, she had gotten into medical school at New York City, Albert Einstein Medical School, which is about the best. And we had moved to New York, to an apartment in New York in 1978, because otherwise it made no sense for the both of us to commute to the city every day. And in her last year of medical school, 1982, we were spending the weekend at the house we had been living previously, but then were using it on weekends in the summer in South Salem, New York. And at least then, I don't know now, the last year of medical school, you did what they call a sub-intern, where for about 3 months, you would do what you were expected to do the next year when your internship started, and you would spend 36 hours or so at the hospital. And she was supposed to do that the next day, February the 1st. So I put her on the train in Westchester to go into the city that evening. It was the last time I ever saw her.
When Kathy disappeared, was there an investigation?
Oh, very substantial investigation.
Did you cooperate with the investigation?
Yes, sir.
Was there much news coverage of her disappearance?
Yes, because of my family's position, and she was very pretty and a last-year medical student at Albert Einstein, and I offered a reward. It was front page big news.
And how was that investigation carried in 1982? What was it?
Missing persons.
You said you offered a reward in the weeks and months and even years to come. Did you receive hoaxes and ransom demands and things of that nature?
Yes, we had many, many sightings that people had seen her and spoke to her, and she was here and she was there. And everything was looked into, but eventually everything turned out either to be a mistake or, as you said, either a hoax or someone wanted the money.
After Kathy disappeared, what happened with your, let's talk about career and marijuana use and other problems. What happened after that?
Well, I've been using marijuana since I discovered it at UCLA in the mid-60s. And it had gradually become a problem, if you will. When I got to New York, I'd always, in the past, drank socially. But now I had started drinking a little bit more than what you would call social drinking. And I always sort of had an eating disorder from when I was a little boy.
What kind of eating disorder?
Well, now it's called bulimia. Now it's called an eating disorder, I guess. And all those things just blossomed, even daily activities, something I couldn't control. In the past, I sort of controlled it more or less.
Did it affect the way that you worked at the Durst organization?
Enormously. In the beginning, at least, I would get up every morning and go to work. But by 1984 or so, I was arriving in the early afternoon at the earliest. And not showing up at all some days.
Did you talk to yourself?
Oh, yes.
When did that start?
I can remember it from elementary school. I had great, elaborate conversations with myself. Wave my hand and talk out loud. People can hear me 23 feet away.
Do you realize you are doing it when you're doing it?
Well, when I realize I'm doing it, I stop. Frequently, I've had people confront me and say, well, if you want to say something to me, say something to me. Because I'll just sort of look straight ahead and people will think I'm staring at them and waving my hands and making facial expressions and talking to them.
Well, now we're kind of in the mid-80s in your life. Marijuana use has increased. Your bulimia has worsened. Are you talking to yourself?
I've always been talking to myself.
What about your alcohol usage?
Yes, I was drinking more.
How did that affect your performance at the Durst organization?
I gradually just stopped going. By 1990, I would just hardly ever go there.
Did you, along this time, meet a woman by the name of Deborah Sheridan?
Yes.
And once you met Debbie, well, let me stop for a second. What was going on with the Durst organization and you? Were you being criticized by your father, by the others at the Durst organization, for your work habits, for your drinking habits, and so forth?
Yes, it was apparent to me and everyone else who either worked for us or worked with us or did a deal with us that I really wasn't capable of working in that type of business, much less running the organization when my father retired, which was going to be in the early 70s, in the early 90s, excuse me.
Well, when you met Deborah, when did you meet her?
In 1988.
Was she one of the ones criticizing you or not?
Well, I don't know if criticizing is right. Certainly it's different. But she was telling me, you know, you got to get control of this. You can't just live your life like this.
Did there come a time when the Durst organization, your father passed on control of the Durst organization, not to you, but to your younger brother?
That's correct.
When did that happen?
Well, it was happening from like 89 on. He was making decisions, and in 1994 was done de jure, if you will.
Was it something that shocked you, or were you expecting it?
I had been looking forward to it. I wished I had the gumption to say, this isn't working, and leave years before that.
So when it happened, how did you feel?
Oh, very relieved. Glad.
Did it make any difference in the amount of money that you would receive from the Durst organization that your father passed on control to your brother rather than you?
No. Salaries are paid, and they're always very low relative to the trust income.
So did you still have your trust income?
Yes.
What did you do then?
Well, I had sort of been planning when I was going, what I was going to do when I left the family business, which was to travel, which I never had the opportunity to do before.
Why not? Why didn't you have the opportunity?
Well, family business is very local. It's just in Manhattan. I didn't want to travel by myself. I didn't have anyone to travel with between the time I was married to Kathy and when I met Deborah Sheridan in the mid-'80s.
So the Durst business being local, had you been able to travel much before then?
No, very little.
So what did you do?
I bought property and houses in Northern California, which I'd always liked it, and down here in Texas and San Francisco. And I started spending very little time in New York. And I would be with Debbie when I was there, and the rest of the time in either Northern California or in Dallas.
Let's talk about Northern California first. Where did you buy property in Northern California?
I owned land in way Northern California, close to the Oregon border, about 400 miles north of San Francisco for many years. But it was just land. It wasn't any place to live on it. So I bought a house in the nearest town, which was the town of Trinidad. The population, I think, 600 or 700 or something like that. And I started living in that house that I bought there.
How far from San Francisco to Trinidad, California?
It's about an 8-hour drive. There's a plane that goes from, you can fly United Express from San Francisco to Eureka, which is about an hour south of Trinidad. And there's about 4 flights up there a day in a small plane.
Did you become familiar with the personnel on that commuter flight from your trips back and forth?
Yeah, there were 2 pilots who flew those flights.
Let's talk about Dallas. Did you have a home in Dallas?
No, I rented an apartment in Dallas.
What kind of apartment?
A big apartment on top of an office building on top of a health club.
And did you have property in San Francisco?
Yes, I had bought a condominium. I bought a project on Telegraph Hill.
Did you travel in other places in this period of time up until October of 2000?
Yes, Debbie and I took 20 to 25 trips out of this country.
What are some of the places across the world that you had traveled to?
Venezuela, Peru, Japan, China, Mexico, France, Belize, Costa Rica, Italy, Spain, England, Israel, Turkey.
Okay, I want to get you up to now up to October the 31st of the year 2000. Up until October the 31st of the year 2000, what had your typical day been like?
Well, get up late in the day, late in the morning or early in the afternoon, and sort of do errands and spend evenings, nights, doing my various addictions, I guess. Unless I was with Debbie, who would insist that I get my act together.
Did you get your act together? Were you using marijuana and alcohol very heavily?
Yes.
All right, something happened on October the 31st of the year 2000 that again turned your world upside down.
On October 31st, I was in New York City in my apartment in downtown New York, and I called my voicemail when I got up in the early afternoon, and there was a message from my sister. Really, the only family member, so to speak, that I had sort of stayed in touch with. And the message was that Mortimer Matz, who headed the public relations agency that worked for the Durst organization, had been receiving calls from New York City tabloids that they were going to do a news story about the disappearance of Kathy Durst.
Kathy had disappeared 18 years earlier, is that right?
About right, yes, sir.
When you got this message from your sister, how did you feel?
Just made me sick to my stomach. And I went into the bathroom and threw up and went back to sleep.
What next happened about that?
I called her that evening.
What did you learn from that call?
The people, my brother and some of the others who ran the Durst organization were very upset. It was going to be very negative publicity focusing in on me that the Durst organization was in the middle of a very politically sensitive project, and this was going to be a problem for them.
What did you want to do?
I wanted to get on the last flight that night and leave around 9:30 or a quarter to 10 to San Francisco.
You wanted to run away?
Yes.
Did they have any kind of request of you? That is, your sister, your brother, and the PR guy for the Durst organization, Mortimer Matz. Did they have any requests of you?
They wanted me to meet with them and a lawyer at the large law firm that the family used.
Is this a lawyer that you chose?
No, I'd never heard of or met Joel Cohen before.
So did the Durst organization choose this lawyer for you?
They wanted me to go and meet with him.
Now, you wanted to run away. When they asked you or told you to do this, what'd you do?
After some argument with my sister, she was the only one I really spoke to, I agreed to go to a meeting the following Tuesday on November the 7th.
In the meantime, did you and Debbie talk?
Yes, I spoke to Debbie a number of times on the phone. We got together, I guess, 2 days after this. And I told her what was happening. She really felt bad for me. I asked her to marry me.
Had you and Debbie discussed marriage before?
Yes, we had discussed marriage before. We had lived together for about a year and a half, and she had moved out because she couldn't handle my daily routine.
Your daily routine was what you have told us about, the marijuana, the alcohol, the bulimia, and so forth?
Yes, sir.
So you asked her to marry you. What did she say?
Yes.
Did you go to the meeting on November the 7th?
Yes.
Who was at the meeting?
My brother, my sister, her husband, Doug Krieger. My sister's name is Wendy Krieger. Mortimer Matz.
Let me stop you there. Mortimer Matz, tell us who he is.
He owns a company with his name on it. That's one of the bigger public relations firms in Manhattan. And he has worked with our family before I got there anyways.
So he's the PR guy for the Durst organization.
Yes, sir.
Who else was at this meeting?
Joel Cohen, the lawyer. And I think he had an associate with him, but I'm not sure.
Now, did you meet all together before you met with Mr. Cohen?
Yes, we met together.
And did you meet with Mr. Cohen?
Yes. After we met together, I met with him separate, yes.
What did you learn from that meeting?
The meeting altogether or the meeting just Joel Cohen and I?
Both of them.
Well, the public relations person, Mortimer Matz, had been receiving numerous phone calls from various media sources, and he had lots of things he wanted me to talk about, things that had happened 18, 17, 16, 15 years ago that I really did not want to talk about. He said it was going to be a large story and opposed to a missing person story like when Kathy disappeared in 1982. At this time, it was going to be focusing in on the husband, me, story.
And what was the focus to be now?
Me.
Now, had the story broken in the press yet when you had this meeting with Mr. Cohen and your family members and the PR guy for the Durst organization?
No.
In the next few days, did the story break?
Yeah, the newspapers carried the story on Saturday, November the 11th.
November the 11th?
Yes.
Give us a description of how the stories were.
Oh, it was on the front page. There wasn't even anyone who didn't know about it. You couldn't miss it. You couldn't walk by a newsstand or walk by a drugstore. I mean, it was everywhere.
Explain a little bit about the newsstands in New York. And a jury, some of these folks may not understand what you mean in New York?
New York is a lot more crowded than it is here. In order to get from wherever you live to any place where you work or a movie or anything, you are going to go by a newsstand. And the newsstands carry the latest editions of all the news, particularly the tabloids, which are frequent editions. And they are hung up on the newsstand. So whether you buy or not, everybody in the city knows what today's big story is. You could read it across the street, just about.
Bob, if you will, for the jury, paint us a word picture of what these tabloids were like when the story broke in New York on November the 11th, 2000.
It was my picture on the front page of the newspaper, about 6 or 8 inches of newspaper. And I don't remember what the captions were, but the hubby something or other negative about me. Quote, hubby didn't care, end quote. Things like that.
You were in New York. Where did you live in New York? What was your home in New York like then?
Well, the day before this news story broke, it was Friday afternoon, the 10th of November.
Let me stop you for a second. My question really was, where did you live? Did you live in an apartment or what?
I had an apartment in Lower Manhattan, yes, sir.
And where is that apartment?
It's what's called Battery Park City, which is a part of a development in the World Trade Center.
You started to tell us. I want to ask you about what happened the night before or the day before the story broke, specifically November 10th, 2000.
I was getting ready to drive up to my house in suburban Connecticut, and the doorman called upstairs, and he said, Mr. Durst on Channel 1. Channel 1 is comparable to Channel 24 here in the Houston area. And he said, there's photographers here. We can arrange to have your car brought around the back, and you can go out the back entrance.
So news photographers had staked out your apartment building?
Yes, sir.
How did that make you feel?
Well, convinced me what I wanted to do was go someplace and hide and not be Robert Durst.
Tell us about how this differed. Your concerns differed in in the year 2000 than what was going on in 1982 when Kathy disappeared.
When Kathy disappeared, everybody was on the same side. We were all trying to find Kathy Durst. And in 2000, no one was on my side. Really. It seemed that it was to the advantage of the authorities that I be painted black.
To this day, have you been charged with anything to do with Kathy's disappearance in 1982?
Neither Janine Pirro nor any member of the police department has contacted me since the 80s.
November 11th, the story breaks. When do you leave?
I decided I was going to go to Galveston and hide.
When did you leave?
On November the 13th.
Just 2 days later, you were already gone?
Well, first I made my trust. I prepared my will, and I prepared powers of attorney for my wife, Deborah Chardon, and my accountant, Anton Weiss.
What did you intend to do?
I intended to go to Galveston and hide myself and never use the name Robert Durst again and never see those people again.
It's still November the 14th. What do you decide to do?
On November the 13th, if you will, I flew to Dallas, where I had the apartment and car. I intended to fill the car up with clothing and linen that I'd used in Dallas, that I had in Dallas. And I decided that I would disguise myself as a woman, buy a wig, like that. And I knew that I would not be able to speak, so I decided to...
Why did you think you wouldn't be able to speak?
My voice is very distinctive. People recognize my voice over the phone after having spoken to me for years. I just couldn't imagine trying to make my voice sound like a woman's.
And how did you choose Galveston?
I had been to Galveston a number of times in the early 90s, and very self-contained and small, and people seemed to leave one another alone. I liked the fact that it was right on the bay and downtown. I could easily get around on a bicycle or walking. I realized I wouldn't be able to keep my car because they would identify me.
Disguising yourself as a woman, how did you decide to do that?
I had worn a beard, a mustache, like that a number of times in my life, and it did not really change my appearance. I don't know how I decided to do that.
In Dallas, you say you loaded your car, you bought a wig. Where did you buy a wig?
I looked in the yellow pages. There were 3 or 4 or 5 wig stores, and there was one that was not that far away on Weston Avenue. I went to that store, and I bought a wig.
What kind of wig?
I was in that place, and I bought it. I thought it was pretty much light brown, but as soon as I got outside and looked at it in the rearview mirror, it was much more blonde than brown.
And you say you had a car in Dallas?
Yes. Well, I had a big apartment there since 1997, I guess. And I had a Honda SUV at the apartment building in Dallas.
And how was that Honda SUV registered?
To me.
So did you drive to Galveston?
Yes. I drove to Galveston the 14th, November the 14th, Tuesday. And I stayed in a motel that's just on this side of the causeway on the right-hand side. I went to Walmart and I bought what I call cargo pants. Big, floppy pants with a bunch of pockets and a woman's white blouse and a woman's handbag and some sort of unisex kind of jacket a woman would wear.
Did you buy a dress?
No.
Did you buy high heels?
No.
What kind of shoes were you going to wear with this disguise?
Shoes, either running shoes or loafers.
So how did you come to choose an apartment that happened to be across the hall from Morris Black?
I got the Galveston Daily News on Wednesday the 15th, and I started calling real estate ads. I didn't want to call one of the services because I knew they would ask for background stuff. And I didn't want anything to demonstrate to them that I was a woman or anyone other than Robert Durst wears. And the first time a person answered the phone, other than a service or a machine, was Klaus Dillman.
Now, did you have with you credit cards that you could use as Robert Durst?
Yeah.
Did you have a Texas driver's license?
Yes.
Your car was registered to Bob Durst, and I presume you had insurance and all that for it.
Yes.
Did you have a cell phone?
Yes.
What was your plan about using any of those phones, credit, driver's license, cell phone, a car in Galveston?
I knew I would not be able to use any of those things. I couldn't use my checks or any of my banking type arrangements.
Why not?
Because it would be Robert Durst in Galveston.
Did anybody that you knew know that you had any kind of ties? Well, did you have any ties to Galveston?
Not when I got here, no.
Did anybody know that anybody connect you, Bob Durst, with Galveston, Texas, if they started looking for you?
No.
Then tell us briefly about your encounter with Klaus Dillman. What did you say on the phone?
I told Klaus Dillman that my sister-in-law, and I used a name from somebody I knew in the past, and that if I made up a woman's name, forget it.
Let me stop you right there. How did you include the name Dorothy Siner?
I don't know. I started thinking of women I had known, and it was there.
Did you know Dorothy Siner after high school?
No.
How did you feel about Dorothy all these years?
I just remember the name, I guess.
All right. What else did you say to Klaus?
Well, I told him that my sister-in-law was mute, in her 50s, and she had seen this ad for an apartment, and she wanted to look at the apartment with the intention of renting it.
What did he say?
He said the apartment did not have handicap facilities and things like that. And I explained that she wasn't really handicapped. She just couldn't talk. And she just wrote notes.
So what happened next?
Well, he said, come on over in half an hour, and made it clear he expected me to go over with my sister-in-law.
Now, wait a minute. How would you, the brother-in-law, go over and also be there disguised as a woman?
I told Klaus that, quote unquote, she does things for herself, and she will meet you there.
Okay, then what happened?
I parked a car a couple blocks away. Otherwise, I figured he would ask me for a license, and that way, I could say I don't drive. He met me at the building, very friendly, seemed at first he believed that I was a woman, which was a very pleasant surprise to me.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, I just don't know if I would be believable as a woman.
Why do you say he believed you?
He acted like he believed me.
Okay, so what happened?
We spent about an hour there. He was very friendly, talked about his business. He had been in the real estate business, or used to, until the mid-'80s, until there had been a big downturn, he said. We talked about the apartment, and eventually he asked if I wanted to rent it. And I wrote yes. And he took out a lease and put in my name, and I signed the lease and gave him the money, cash, and he gave me the keys.
So now you have an apartment as Dorothy Siner, a mute woman in Galveston, Texas. What did you do with your car?
I knew I had to get the car somewhere far away from here. So the next day, Thursday the 16th, I drove it to Baton Rouge and found out where a Greyhound station was. And I left it about a mile or so from the Greyhound station and took out everything that had anything to do with me and left the keys in it, walked to the Greyhound station.
So you just left your car in Baton Rouge?
It was some very lucky person about to have this great car.
Did you ever expect to see the car again?
No,
Did it matter?
I didn't want to see the car again.
So what did you do then?
I took the Greyhound to Houston and the bus from Houston to Galveston.
When you got back to Galveston, what did you do?
By the time I got back, it was late at night, so I didn't do anything. I went to sleep
Where?
in the apartment.
Now, did you have any utilities in the apartment?
Well, the utilities, the electric and gas, were turned on. But when I rented the apartment, Mr. Dillman explained that they were in his name, that I would have to put them in my name, Dorothy Siner.
Did you try to do that?
Yeah.
With what result?
The utility company wanted a social security number, and I didn't have a social security number.
So what did you do?
I tried to figure out what else I could do, and I had called Mr. Dillman back and told him that my mute sister-in-law was having difficulty getting the utilities turned on, and asked if he would keep it in his name and raise the rent.
Did he agree to do that?
He went back and forth with me a little bit on how much to raise the rent to, but yes, he agreed to do that.
Now, you get the utilities on, and you're now Dorothy Siner. You're living as a mute woman in an apartment in Galveston. Did you meet Morris Black?
The next day, let me see what happened the next day. That was Friday. I spoke to Klaus Dillman about the utilities on the apartment. And I went to Star Furniture and bought furniture. And that evening, I was going out dressed as a mute woman around 7 o'clock, and a man came out of the door to the apartment across the hall, just as I was opening the door to the front of my building.
What did he say, if anything?
He said that I should not leave the hall light on because the hall light was on his electric meter.
Now, did you have the wig on,
The whole thing, yeah.
the disguise? And when Morris Black told you not to leave the light on, what did you do?
I had written, "I am a mute," on the back of a 3x5 card with a black felt pen. He held up the card and he got very nervous. And I guess I had nodded that I wouldn't leave the hall light on, whatever that was. And I left.
Just let me backtrack for just a second. You said you went to Star Furniture and you bought some furniture. How'd you pay for it?
Cash.
Did you have cash with you?
Yes.
Getting cash ever been a problem for you?
No.
So now back to you just met Morris Black. You flash the card. He gets nervous. What do you do then?
I walked out to the seawall.
From the apartment?
Yeah.
The apartment is at 2213 Avenue K. Estimate for us how far the walk is.
Half a mile, 3/4 maybe.
Do you jog or have you been a jogger?
Yeah.
And so what happened when you went to the seawall?
I just walked up and down the seawall. I think I walked up past the San Luis to Walmart, and I walked back to 23rd Street.
That's a pretty good distance, isn't it?
Well, it's a nice night. And when I walked over there, I passed a liquor store on 23rd Street, Economy Liquor. And I planned on stopping in there and getting a bottle of liquor on the way back to the apartment.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I walked in and found Jack Daniels, which is what I like to drink. And I was paying for a bottle of Jack Daniels, and Morris Black walked in.
Did you recognize him?
The man who I came to know as Morris Black. At the time, I just knew him as the man across the hall.
So he hadn't introduced himself to you,
No, I don't think so.
but knew who he was?
I knew he was the man who had come out of the door across the hall.
So what happened after he walked in, after you had this bottle of Jack Daniels you had bought?
He said that he liked Jack Daniels too.
Do you know if he had followed you there?
I sort of wondered about it, but I have no idea.
What happened after that?
I just walked back to the building.
You didn't see Morris Black again that night?
No, sir.
For the rest of November, the next couple of weeks, and into the early part of December, did you stay in Galveston?
Yes, sir.
Did you use the phone at all?
My cell phone?
Cell phone, any phone?
Well, I use payphones now and then, but I didn't use my cell phone.
What are some of the other things that you did in Galveston in these few weeks? You established yourself as a mute woman.
I don't know about established myself, but I went to the Rosenberg Library frequently. I continued jogging, like I described.
Let's talk about the Rosenberg Library. For those who are not familiar with it, how close is the Rosenberg Library to where your apartment was at 2213 Avenue K?
Very convenient, very pleasant-like. It turned out to be a couple blocks away.
Okay, and what was attractive to you about the library?
I'd always spent time at libraries, but they had a computer room with a whole bunch of computers where you could just get on the internet, and was very, very frequently not at all crowded.
Did you use the computer room at the Rosenberg Library?
Every day for a long period of time. I wanted to see the articles from New York to see if somebody was talking about me and or arresting me.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but just as a side note, did you from time to time see Morris Black in the computer room at the library?
I think I only saw him once, or at most twice during those days. But coming in and out of the building, we saw each other a couple of times.
Now, we're talking about now just in the last half of November and the first part of December, right?
Right.
Well, when you went on the computers, do you have to pay to go on the computers in the Rosenberg Library?
No, sir.
Do you have to sign on some kind of traceable sign-on language? I'm not computer efficient, but what do you have to do to go on the computer?
You walk into the computer room and there is a desk to your right, and there's a person sitting at the desk. Whenever I went in, it's pretty much the same person, this young lady, very friendly, and must have 20, 25 machines. And you sign your name underneath where the last name is. And theoretically, you're supposed to use the machine that has the number next to it. But when there would be only 3 or 4 or even 10 people there, they would not really care where you sat. So you would just sit next to any computer. And there was no real sign-on or anything like that.
Okay, and what did you use the computers for while at the Rosenberg Library these first few weeks?
I always liked the internet, but immediately I would get the New York newspapers.
And when you got the New York papers, what did you learn? What was going on in New York?
Well, a lot of things were going on, but I was in a newspaper every day, and some of the newspapers several days.
You are still wearing your disguise, your wig?
Yes, sir.
In December then, after these 3 more weeks, we are going around Galveston disguised, did you decide to try to talk to people in New York?
I wanted to talk to Debbie. I wanted to talk to Joel Cohen to see what was going on, but I just did not want to make a phone call from here in Galveston to them. They would immediately know where I am with caller ID and all that stuff.
So had you had any contact with the people you knew in New York while you were in Galveston that first 3 weeks?
I hadn't contacted anyone I know at all.
And the reason you didn't was why?
Well, whoever I contacted would know I was in Galveston.
So what did you do?
I planned on leaving Galveston and going a distance away. I mean, a car. And I decided to take the Greyhound and go some distance away and go to New York.
So did you take a Greyhound?
I went to Houston and I took the Greyhound, yeah.
How far did you go?
I was planning on going to Atlanta, but I went all the way to New York.
All the way to New York City?
Yes, sir.
On the Greyhound?
Yes, sir.
How long did it take?
I left Wednesday at 6, and I got there Friday morning at 6. That's 36 hours.
Thank you. 36 hours on a Greyhound bus?
Yes, sir.
You're a multimillionaire from New York?
I can't explain it, no.
What happened when you got back to New York?
Well, I was at the big bus station in the middle of Manhattan. I can't think of what it's called. Right away, I went to a payphone, and if Joel Cohen said he heard from this policeman or that policeman or something like that, I would immediately get back on the bus and go back to Galveston. I called my voicemail, and they have a whole bunch of messages, and Joel Cohen went through a litany of media outlets that had contacted him, many television outfits, Inside Edition, Dateline, 48 Hours, 2020, like that. But nothing about this Janine Pirro had actually done anything. As a matter of fact, I think he knocked her a little bit.
These are all messages that you get on your...
Voicemail, my message system.
Okay, so what did you think?
I thought that maybe I could... I thought, well, I have a place of refuge. I don't have to go to Galveston right now, and I will go to my apartment and see.
I think this is a good place to break. Let's take our afternoon recess until 3:15. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express